Book 5, Salem, Safety Assured, Leaving East of Medicetti. Chapter 17. Not even one trumpet. The next day was Holy Day, and before they were to go to their congregational meeting, the Shem family had something to do first. The 5 of them stood that early morning in front of the small stone building. No one dared knock on the door. "Are you sure this is it?" Pato squinted at the simple wood door, the plain stone structure, and the unadorned peaked roof. Perrin shrugged. "It's where the guide said to be." The door swung open, and a man in his 40s smiled in greeting. "Thought I heard someone out here. Come in, they'll be ready for you in just a moment." Perrin glanced at his wife and led the way, Mari following with Pato, Jatsi, and Dek behind. They found themselves in a small room where wooden benches had been set along the sides next to the windows, cushioned with simple brown pillows. "Please sit down," the man said genially. "I'll let them know you're here. We're just wrapping up. Holy days are our busiest, you know. This won't take but a minute." He slipped through the double doors across from them, and the sounds of a quiet conversation leaked out before the doors shut solidly. "I'm assuming," Jatsi said, looking around her as she sat, "that this is nothing like the administrative headquarters." "Not at all," Mari chuckled softly. "First, I'm not so nervous in the waiting room that I'm trying to think of ways to pass out. And second, while the sofas were far more elaborate, they actually felt firmer than this bench." Everyone sat and stared at the walls, waiting. "So," Dek started, attempting to break the uncomfortable silence, "what was involved in installing a high general in Idemia?" Perrin exhaled and rolled his eyes. "What's involved is about 1,000 bored soldiers from the garrison and surrounding areas forced to put on their dress uniforms. All of the administrators showing up in their fancy red coats with tails, plus several musicians, trumpeters, drummers, and the like, doing whatever it is they do. Then the family of the new high general dressed in suits and silks and walking down a ridiculously long procession to the playing of the aforementioned trumpeters and drummers, while the new high general does this odd slow march to some pavilion." He gestured a grand structure in the air, "while wearing all of his pomp and finery and medals and tries to look distinguished without clanking. Then he stands in front of Nico Mal, recites some long, dull, boring speech that they call an oath, while all of the unfortunate soldiers stand at attention for what feels like an hour. Then Mal does something, I can't remember what, and the high general glides back down again between all of the soldiers with their swords out and raised high, probably wishing someone would drop one accidentally. Since it's Kay and Thorn, there may be a lot of accidents, and all the while they're quietly praying, even though they've never prayed before, that it could just end already. Oh, and there's a stuffy dinner afterwards." Seeing the sneers on everyone's faces, Dek said, "So this will be better then?" "I don't know what's about to happen, Dek," Perrin admitted. "I was just told to come this morning, bring the family, and—" Mari smoothed her skirt. "I'm not sure I'm dressed for the occasion." Pato scoffed. "What else would you wear, Mother? No one here has even heard of silk." Of course, how silly of me." The door swung open to reveal the same man, smiling broadly. "We're ready for you." Perrin took a deep breath and stood up with his family. He headed for the doors, absently patting his left side for his sword, forgetting again, just a moment too late, that it wasn't there. He clenched his fist briefly instead. Anything formal made him tense, especially when he didn't know the level of formality expected. But quickly he began to relax, because before him was a room not much larger than his new eating room. A long, plain table ran down the center of it, and on each side of the table were 6 men, 12 in total, dressed in the same simple tunics and trousers as Perrin. They ranged in ages from middle-aged to quite elderly, And they quickly rose, well, some of the older ones weren't exactly quick, and used the table, and in one case a neighbor, to get to his feet, to greet the Shins with enthusiastic smiles. At the very end stood Guide Gleese, grinning, his empty chair in front of him. The Creator's assistants were a far more friendly sight than the world's administrators, Perrin thought to himself. Mari wouldn't be passing out today. Salem's new general smiled back, until his eyes fell on the assistant closest to him and positioned at the most junior spot at the table. He was considerably younger than the rest, and also appeared a bit surprised to be there. Perrin didn't mean to, but it had been gnawing at him all night and morning, and it just happened. He glowered at Shem. Shem's smile fell, and he swallowed nervously. Just how much did Shem think one man could take? How many more secrets and surprises? What else would Shem spring on him with his feigned innocence? "Oh, I forgot to tell you, but—" Shem shifted from one foot to another, knowing full well by Perrin's squint precisely how frustrated he was. That was the man Perrin was supposed to report to. That being of lies, that withholder of information, never, not once, in his past few days of full disclosure, had Shem bothered to disclose that his so-called claimed brother was supposed to be Salem's general. Not in the barn at Dex when he professed to be honest about everything. Not in the cavern at the first resting station. Not even during their first night in Salem. Shem was an endless supply of surprises. And that was the man he was supposed to report to. Perrin pointed at him, wishing his finger could somehow be sharper. "You!" The expressions on the faces of the assistants froze as their new general eyed their newest assistant. "Perrin," Mari said gently, taking his arm. Shem firmed his stance, but also cowered ever so slightly. "Something wrong, General Shin?" Because he possessed nothing more threatening, Perrin pointed again, as aggressively as possible. "I want the truth from you, the entire truth, with no more little parts hiding out to jump at me later. How long did you know?" Shem chuckled nervously and looked around the table. If he was expecting support, he wasn't getting it, since the older men, tensing in worry, weren't sure what to say either. Guide Gleese folded his arms and watched. Shem began, with a grin that bordered on the inane. "Since the very beginning, Perrin. The only reason I was sent to you was because we thought you were the one, our future general. Guide Hafadi wanted to be sure." Perrin pulled back his finger to make a fist that he still held up. "We discussed this last night, Perrin," Gleese said steadily from the other side of the table. "Shem could never have told you anything. He wanted to, but it was my calling to explain it all, and to issue you the call to be our general. Shem was merely following orders. First Guide Hafadi's, then my orders," he emphasized, "which, Perrin, outranked any of yours." Gleese's expression was kind yet admonishing at the same time, a mixture which, Perrin realized, had he been able to perfect, would have caused all the thieving youth of Edge to feel as contrite and humble as he felt right then. When Mari tugged on his arm again, a little more urgently, he knew he had no other option but to drop his fist and attempt to smile. "Sorry, Shem, everyone. It's just that so many secrets, so many revelations." He shrugged helplessly. "My head's been swirling so much that this morning I wasn't even sure if I had my boots on the right feet." The men at the table laughed, too earnestly, relieved that they weren't about to witness their first fist fight in Salem, and on a holy day at that. Throwing all caution to the wind, Shem caught Perrin in a big hug. "I'm sorry too, General. but we've waited so long for this day. Isn't it amazing? Say it with me. Amazing! Come on, your favorite word. Perrin's glare turned pitiful. It was difficult to stay stern when everyone around him was laughing. All right, Shem, maybe later, once everything's out of the way, he said, not sure what everything was about to be. Guide, Murray said, I hope we're dressed appropriately. Glees smiled. Just fine, Mrs. Shin. This isn't Idemia, you know. The Creator has no need for shows and demonstration. He doesn't need to establish his power. He just wants to share it. So what happens now? Perrin asked. Simple, Glees said, pulling his chair out from the table. You sit here. I put my hands on your shoulders, and in front of your family and these witnesses, I, by the authority of the Creator, proclaim and bless you to be Salem's general. I may ask for the Creator to help inspire you in ways to fulfill your calling, grant you the health and the strength you need to defend this land, and probably thank the Creator for sending us such a capable soldier. I might even remind you to be nice to Shem, since he was just doing his duty after all. Everyone chuckled at that, even Perrin. But perhaps I could leave that out. Then you stand up, shake my hand, and we all go our separate directions since Holy Day is the busiest day for all of us. He raised his eyebrows expectantly and gestured to the chair. Perrin nodded and started to make his way past the assistants to the head of the table. The men sat down and slid their chairs in to make room for him to get by. Pato muttered, as his father squeezed between the old men and the wall. Not even one trumpet. One of the assistants heard him. I've got a small flute in my pocket, and he fished it out to show him. Pato waved that off. I'm sorry, he smiled, slightly embarrassed. Just never mind. Would you like flute lessons? Mari, Jatsi, and Dek tried not to snort. No, Pato exclaimed, blushing. I was just being... Really, please, just never mind. Perrin shot Pato a warning look. Because I'm a very good teacher. I believe, Gull, Glees said as Perrin, who finally made it to the other end of the table and sat down, that young Mr. Shin was referring to some of the more bombastic displays in Idemia. Usually an event such as appointing a new leader would be accompanied by trumpets. Ah, the assistant said, slipping the flute back into his pocket, much to the relief and embarrassment of Pato. Another assistant patted the flute-toting assistant on the back. Young Mr. Shin was displaying a subtle example of sarcasm, Gull. Since you never spent time as a scout, you never learned that affectation of the world. Mr. Shin is well versed in the techniques, I'm sure. Sorry, Pato mumbled again. And as you can tell, Shem said, smirking, several of our assistants are also well versed in the techniques. Perrin glanced around at the assistants. Just how many of you served as scouts? 8 hands went up. So did Perrin's eyebrows. Then he rubbed his forehead. The surprises weren't about to end any time soon. I remember that move, an elderly assistant pointed at him. You massaged your forehead even as a teenager. Perrin's hand stopped moving. You must have been about 16 or 17, the assistant went on, clearly enjoying his reminiscing. I was working under your father Ralph at the time. You came into the stable where he was, asking your father for something. I don't remember what it was, but when he denied you, you started massaging your forehead. Perrin's hand dropped to his lap, and he stared at the old man. It's quite all right, he continued. Rather an endearing trait. Helped us to identify you. He hasn't seen his file yet, Glees said. Perrin sighed. My file? To make sure we were watching the right people, Gleese told him, we not only recorded physical descriptions, but also quirks and mannerisms. The elderly man grinned. I was the first to record you were a head rubber. Whenever the world went contrary to what you expected, that's when your fingers met your forehead. Perrin clenched his fists to keep from rubbing his head. The elderly man craned his neck to see Perrin's lap. Yep, recorded you did that, too. Fists, to keep from massaging your forehead. Mari was shaking so hard at the other side of the room that she couldn't contain it anymore. Her snort escaped, and her daughter, who was giggling, elbowed her. It was my son who noticed that. The man smiled at Mari. Mrs. Shin's a snorter, he said. His descriptions helped your sister Galena to find her in the forest, didn't they, Hugh? I never snorted in the forest, Mari declared, to the amusement of the room. No, but you snorted in the village. Even Perrin began to chuckle. I think I'll have to take a look at those files. All of them, he said, looking up at Gleese. Once you're General Shin, those files will belong to you. Now, if we may. 4 minutes later, Perrin became General Shin, with Guide Gleese saying exactly what he predicted he would, without the reminder to be nice to Shem. General Shin and his family left the small stone structure a few minutes later, after each of the assistants insisted on hugging him, and walked home for breakfast before the congregational meeting, as if extraordinary things happened like that every day. In Salem, it seemed they actually did. 2 hours later, the Shins and Briders realized that the guide wasn't exaggerating the night before about the congregation meeting. Their neighborhood congregation hall was packed, with more children and young adults than any of them had ever seen before at a Holy Day service. Even though they were early, they sat near the back because of the crowd. At the front of the congregation hall stood a couple of men talking to Shem. He had been watching the door, and when he saw the Shins come in, he nodded a quick goodbye and made his way through the aisles to them. It took him a few minutes to get there because of the number of people wanting to shake his hand and share a word. But when he finally made it to the back, Perrin was smirking. Is everyone here to see you? Shem shook his head. This is how it is every week. Not like Edge, right? It's a lot noisier than Edge, too, Murray said, watching a family of small boys in front of her try to sit down on top of each other. And who went to the services there? Old people, one bachelor, and your family, Shem reminded her. That's true, Murray agreed, watching the boys rearrange themselves. I think the noise of children is better than the snores of old women, Pato finished for her. That old Mrs. Vitz drove me crazy every week. Always sat behind us, too. Pato, that's not very nice, Jatesy said. But her attention was drawn to a little girl wandering down their row, eyeing Deck. She stopped at his knee, leaned on it, and looked up at him with adoring eyes. Deck sat back nervously and scanned the area, searching for anyone missing a child. No nearby adults seemed to belong to her. Unable to ignore her puppy dog eyes any longer, Deck looked down. Hi. She smiled. He squirmed. Time to find your parents, don't you think? You have a nose. Deck looked around him again, growing desperate. Yes, I do. It's right there. Deck leaned over. Jatesy, he said through clenched teeth, why is she talking to me? Because apparently you have a nose, Jatesy whispered. Pato shook with silent laughter. Deck prodded his brother-in-law next to him. Talk to him. He's looking for single women. Are you practical? The girl shook her head. I like you. I like your nose. Deck's face went mushy, either from trying to see his nose or trying to figure out what to say next. Suddenly, struck with brilliance, he said, "I hear your mother calling you." "No, you don't. She's back there talking. I see her." Deck craned his neck to see several rows of happily chatting women, all of who could have been the right age to be her mother. "Your father's calling you, then?" "No, he's not. He's talking to those mans over there." Down the road, Deck saw a man talking to his in-laws in Shem. "So I can stay here and look at your nose. Are you a papa yet?" "Almost." Jatesy and Pato giggled next to him. "You won't be very good at it," she decided. "What?" Deck exclaimed as Jatesy held her belly and laughed. Pato nearly fell off the bench. The girl's father was working his way down the row. "I'm sorry. Is she insulting you? She tends to do that. Can't really control the tongue of a 3-year-old. I know, we've been trying. Come on, troublemaker. It's time to say awkward things to your mama." The girl smiled sweetly at Deck and batted her eyelashes. "Bye." Deck frowned. "Our child will never be like that." "Oh, now you've gone and done it, Deckett-Brighter," Mari sighed. "You've doomed yourself to have a daughter just like her. That's how it works, you know. The Creator hears you criticizing, then he sends you the same challenge to see how well you'll handle it. I know. That's how we ended up with Pato." "Hey!" Pato exclaimed, before being shushed by his family as the service started. At the beginning of the service, Rector Bustani, whom they'd met the day before, invited the Shins and the Brighters to stand so he could introduce them. The congregation had become surprisingly quiet and reverent as soon as the rector stood up, which meant everyone there heard clearly who it was who had just moved in. It was unnerving to face several hundred heads swiveling to gawk at them, especially since Perrin suspected what they were all thinking about him. It didn't help that Rector Bustani had announced that earlier in the morning, Perrin had accepted the call to be Salem's general. He knew he was going pink when one of the little boys in the row in front of them whispered loudly, "He chased bad men with Shem Zenas." His mother quickly covered his mouth as several rows of people chuckled. The mother smiled an apology to Perrin, and he nodded forgivingly at her. "Can we see your sword later?" one of the older brothers whispered enthusiastically. When they sat back down, Perrin leaned over to Mari. "So much for living in anonymity." "They'll forget," she whispered. But by the time the service ended, no one had forgotten. There was a line to greet the Shins and Brighters nearly as long as there was to catch a few minutes with the rector. It was 45 minutes later before they started to make their way home. Accompanied, of course. "I'm really sorry," the boy's mother said to Mari as they walked together back to the Shins' home. "We should rescue him." But Mari laughed. "Don't you dare. This is the best entertainment I've seen in weeks." Pato, Jatesy, and Deck chuckled in agreement. Ahead of them on the road, Perrin looked back briefly. Mari waved to him to continue. "Really," the boy's father said, "he doesn't deserve—" "Oh, yes, he does," Pato declared. The string of 5 boys that had sat in front of them during the service were knotted around Perrin, asking him so many questions that he never had a chance to answer any of them. "So if a garter is coming from the left and another from the right?" "Well, that really didn't happen." "What if you lost your horse? What if you were running and—" "Actually, that did happen. You see—" "They really made you leave your sword? That's so mean." "Not really. I turned in my sword because I—" "How do you hold one? Here, show me with this stick." "I don't think your mother would approve." "No, this stick. It's bigger." "Salem's supposed to be a place of peace, so I don't think—" "He's holding it wrong, isn't he, Mr. Shin? He's always doing it wrong." Mari was giggling so hard she was shaking. The boy's mother glanced over at her. I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but you're nothing like I expected. Neither is your husband. The boy's father nodded. He's remarkably patient. The youngest son grabbed Perrin's hand and held it firmly as they walked. Perrin glanced back again at Mari with pleading in his eyes, but she just beamed at him. Everyone gets the wrong idea about him, Mari said, but we know he's a big softy, especially when someone puts an infant in his arms. Jatsi ran her hand over her belly and smiled. I'll admit, the boy's father said, that I was a little worried to hear General Shen would be our neighbor, but now I'm more worried for him. The Shen's briders and the boy's parents laughed, and Perrin glanced back one more time, seeking deliverance. By now, each boy had a large stick in his hand, hoping for a lesson. Knowing there was no way around it, he stopped. Men, he announced formally, and each boy stood immediately at attention. He smiled at their obedience, which was snappier than many of his new recruits. Well done. Men, hand me those swords. It's time to teach you a thing or two. Uh-oh, Deck mumbled to Pato. If he takes them to the barn for wrestling practice, they're just going to giggle. Like we did? Perrin stood at command in front of his short troops. Do you men want to become the strongest soldiers? Yes, sir. Their mother cleared her throat, uncertain about what the new general may be intending, but Perrin winked reassuringly at her. Back in the world, we judged the strongest soldier. He tossed away the sticks, much to the boys' dismay. By having a race. Yes, I realize you don't really have races in Salem. He sent a sidelong glance to his family. But you don't have swords either. Yet, boys being boys, you seem to know how to fashion them anyway. So, men, we'll have a race. But not just any race. An obstacle race, like we had in Edge. Shem, Zenas, and I had to run through gardens, orchards, from one house to another, and once I even had to run carrying a chicken for a mile. And guess what? Chickens don't enjoy running. The boys burst into giggles. And in one race, Shem had to kiss a girl. Perrin pulled a face which the boys all matched. Ew, yuck! So, men, who's ready to start becoming the strongest soldier? Your first task is to run home when I say. The boys jumped up and down, clapping their hands. Their mother relaxed. He is a clever one, isn't he? Mari chuckled. That he is. Line up, men, Perrin ordered. He waved over the children's father to come stand next to them. Your father will run behind you to make sure none of you cheat. We always had chasers on our races. Now, line up here. When I say go, you run as fast as you can for home. Right? The boys nodded and got into position, waiting for the word. Ready? Go! 4 boys took off running with their father behind, but the youngest, 3 years old, burst into tears. Perrin picked him up. Want to be my chicken? Yes! Perrin tucked him under his arm and started in a sprint after the older brothers, quickly catching up to them. Their mother's jaw dropped to see General Shen loping past her sons, her youngest tucked under his arm like a laughing bale of hay. Mari patted the boy's mother. He may be jiggled up a bit, but Perrin never dropped a chicken. The mother chuckled. Yes, nothing at all as I imagined. I think you're going to do just fine in Salem. After the race, which the 3-year-old won with a little help, the Shins and Briders finished their midday meal consisting of offerings left by the Salemites the day before. They were just cleaning up when a knock came at the door. And so it begins, Pato grumbled as Dec went to answer it. Oh, I don't mind, Mari smiled as she carried plates into the kitchen. After several weeks of no contact with people in Edge, she was hungry for friends. Just us, a familiar voice called, and Shem and Yudit came into the large gathering room. I'm sure you've been visited near to death, Yudit said, but we have something for you. And she held up a large wrapped package. Perrin picked up the last of the plates from the table. You're always welcome. Come, sit down. Yudit motioned to the family. This is for all of you. She sat the bundle on the table and waited for Perrin and Mari to come back into the room. Then she unwrapped a large book. The Writings, updated version. I understand your version was a bit thinner. Mari started bouncing when she saw it. Does it have the family lines? Yudit opened the thick leather binding and thumbed through the new crisp pages to the back to reveal several charts and diagrams full of names and dates. There it is, the first 500 families, then their descendants. Takes up a big part of the text, but we've developed a rather efficient numbering system. Now, Mari, where did she go? Everyone heard Mari running up the stairs. They shrugged to each other and waited because a moment later she came rushing back down. Pressed to her chest were papers, and she regarded Perrin with edgy excitement. I have something I wasn't supposed to let the commander of Edge know I had. But since he's had Terrap's map all this time, Mari laid down the pages and smoothed them on the table. Family lines, Jatesy squealed. How did you get them? This is your handwriting, Perrin said, picking up one copy. Pato took the copy underneath. But I don't know this writing. That's because your great-great-great-grandmother Canthe made that copy, just as the king was asking for the lines, Mari told them. Her husband Vidro told her to make a copy, and it was handed down our line through the women. My mother had it hidden in her recipe collection. I made a copy of it right after Pato was born. Perrin narrowed his eyes at her. Before or after? He asked. Mari thought for a moment, trying to understand what he meant, before she remembered their argument on their second wedding anniversary. After. I was going to give a copy to Jatesy in a few years to stash in her recipe collection, but now? She grinned at Yudit. Can we find my line? Of course, said Yudit. Let's start with the names before the division and see if your names are the same we have recorded. Mari Pato Shin, Shem said slowly. You are a traitor. I know, Mari squealed. Yudit flipped several pages in the writings, glanced at Mari's notes, then turned another few pages. No, she whispered, and Mari had never realized before that the word could sound happy. Shem, look! She handed him Mari's copy and pointed to a name. Hey, that looks like... Shem checked the pages and said a happy, No! Just as his sister had. What? What? Mari cried. My father's line, Shem said. Mari, we share the same great-great-great-grandfather, Boscos. My father was named after him. 5 generations back, but we're cousins. Yudit clapped her hands. Oh, I love doing family lines. See, you really do belong here. Really? Mari had tears welling in her eyes. Are you sure? But I don't have a Boscos. Actually, you do. Look, Yudit said, taking Mari's pages and laying them next to the Zenas family lines. In our records, there were a couple of sons who went missing during the Great War. We don't know what happened to them. We have birth dates, but no deaths. Either they died in battle or were separated from their families or severed contact. Right here, Your great-great-grandfather Barnos was one who was considered lost. But his last name was Eno, Mari said. That was common then. When adult children disagreed with their parents, they often cut off part of their last names to designate a break with the family. We have him recorded as having changed his name to Eno as well. Yudit pointed to his name on the line. That's right. Professor Copperseed told us all about that practice, Mari said. He must have chopped his name before his father Boscos came to Salem, bringing what family he had left with him, Yudit decided. There were a few adult children left behind. Look at your copy, Mari. See, even though Barnos' parents' names are recorded as Osco and Hold Eno, there were no other Eno families in the world. I have the records to prove it. When Barnos registered his name and his parents' names, as was required at the time when someone moved into a new village, he probably changed their identities to protect himself from suspicion. Boscos became Osco, and Hulda became Hold. He likely didn't want anyone to know his family were garters who escaped. We think that's part of the reason why all the records were eventually destroyed. Who knows, maybe even King Coral had garter blood he didn't want anyone to discover. That's what Grace and Fod's ancestors did too, Shem said. Hifadi was cut down to Fod. Mari ran her hand reverently over the names. I never would have guessed, she said softly. I never even considered that Zenas might have been the same as Eno, she said quietly, looking at her family lines next to the Zenas lines. Once they reached Boscos Zenas, the names were identical, back to the first families. Had I known, Shem, I might have risked asking you about it. Shem exhaled. Whew, good thing you didn't, Mari. I wouldn't have known what to answer you. Yes, you're my fourth cousin. That's why we have the same color hair. Now, want to guess how I know that and where I really came from? The family chuckled, and Mari put her arm around her cousin and squeezed him. That's amazing, Perrin said, shaking his head as the family leaned over to read the names on the Zenas family line. I know, Shem, I said amazing again. I think I'm entitled. Well, Pato, what do you think? He's almost your real uncle. Pato, where did he go? Pato was upstairs in his room, pulling the thick parchment envelope out from under his new tunics. With his hands shaking in excitement, he opened the envelope, pulled out the document, and thought he could smell Ralph Shin. He unfolded it and smiled at the two names at the top of the page. Begin with the names I told you. Someday you will want to know them again. I'll remember, Grandfather. Not good enough. You must write it down, boy. Then write down what I told you. Neater than that, Pato. I can see the scribbles from here. Pato grinned as he pulled out his new pocket knife, laid the parchment on the desk, and using a book as a straightedge, carefully sliced off the top strip. It contained two names and the signature of his grandfather. Pato chuckled as he folded the larger piece of parchment, put it back into the envelope, and slid it back into its hiding place. Now, watch, Grandfather. He walked as casually as possible down the stairs, the thin slip of paper hiding in his shirt pocket, to see the inquisitive look of his father. Everything all right, Pato? Yeah, sure. I was just thinking, Yudit, if you still have that page open, oh, good, you do. What can you tell me about a name I saw on your family's line? He leaned over the book and pointed. Lorexania. That looked like an interesting name. Yudit rolled her eyes. Lorexania Iranicki. Well, now, she was a character. She pointed to the name on the opposite page, an ancestor on their mother's line. With a name like Lorexania? Perrin chuckled. I imagine she would be. We know only a little bit about her, Shem said, such as that she was the most outspoken woman in our mother's line. And that's saying something, Yudit chuckled. Our mother's line was an unbroken string of loud women for 6 generations, until Shem disrupted the pattern. Shem grinned. When our father was courting our mother, she warned him that no sons had been born into her family for generations, and if he was serious about her, he'd better expect daughters. That's why my father was so proud of himself when I was born. Well now, Lorexania Araniki. We don't have her married name recorded, Yudit explained. Lorexania was rebellious, loud, and a shockingly large woman with a deep voice. She had her own ideas about everything, questioned everything anyone ever told her, and never followed expectations. During the Great War, she tried a few times to follow her husband, who was an officer in the army, into battle. He kept sending her back along with her long knives. Apparently, she had several stashed around the house. Perrin chuckled. Sounds like my kind of a woman. You think so, Father? Pato asked. When the time for the division came, Yudit continued, and Lorexania's parents got the message of Salem, her father told her she needed to escape with them. But Lorexania decided he was making a mistake, and she didn't want to leave her husband, who refused to go. Baba Araniki, her father, wasn't too happy about the idea of an army, Shem told them. The idea of men organized specifically to fight? He thought that was the most horrific thing he'd ever heard of. Perrin scoffed lightly. Can you imagine his reaction to realize his great-great... He paused to count the generations, shrugged as he gave up, then said, well, his descendant grandson, Shem Zenas, was one of the highest-ranked soldiers in the world? Yes, Pato said slyly. Can you imagine? Yudit grimaced. Well, I'm sure he's seen the need now. But back then, there was a huge family argument, and Lorexania's parents couldn't convince her to join them. Her mother, Matira, was devastated. We have a few pages of her writings describing her grief. Lorexania stayed behind, never to be heard from again. Broke her parents' hearts. What was her husband's name? Yudit looked back at the line. Right there, Shem pointed. We have only the first name. He was called Lek. No one noticed Pato developing wetness around his eyes. No one had ever seen that before, so no one even bothered to look. Lek? Jatsi made a face. This sounds like something you do when you're sick. Oh, now be nice, Mari said. Don't make fun of people's names. It's Shem's family, and he might be insulted. It's not just Shem's family, said a quiet voice. Everyone turned to Pato. He removed a slip of paper from his pocket and laid it down on the chart of family names. Lek and Lorexania Shin. Signed, Ralph Shin. Dear Creator, Mari whispered. That was the only sound for a full minute. 7 pairs of eyes stared at the names scrawled by a younger Pato, accompanied by the verifying signature of Ralph Shin, trying to let the weight of the names sink in. It was like trying to absorb mushrooms. Finally, Pato broke the silence. He knew that since he caused it, he best end it. Lek Shin was a general in Idemia, he said softly to the stunned family. One of the first 5 generals ever appointed. General Pershin wasn't the first Shin general, nor was Lieutenant Colonel Rakulfus Shin the first in our family to be an officer. Lek Shin was supposed to have been the first high general, but it seems he failed in his most important commission given to him by the king, to retrieve the rebellious Garter family of his wife. That's what the last High General Shin of Idemia told me, days after they pulled him from the rubble and days before he died. That's why Ralph was there when the tremor hit. He'd accidentally found family histories in that old storage room and went back early in the morning to read them in private. It was probably the box you thought you saw, Father, where you found the maps when you were a lieutenant. Someone moved the cabinet in front of it, but Grandfather moved it away. We are garters on both sides of our family. Always have been. Baba Aranicki actually had several descendant grandsons who ranked as the highest soldiers in the world. And this morning, one was installed as the General of Salem. Pato watched the other 6 people to see who would break their frozen silence next. It was Shem. Pato thought he could have been a betting man. He picked that one right off. "We're family, Perrin!" Shem cried as he gave Perrin a big bear hug that lifted him off the ground. Perrin still stared, transfixed at the names. "That's why my family needed a son, to come get you, to bring our families together again. This is amazing!" He shook Perrin, his arms still wrapped around him. "Say it with me, Perrin, amazing!" Dec chuckled at Shem's enthusiasm and Perrin's continued shock. "By my count," he said, "this is the 3rd time in 4 days we've stared at a document in surprise. How many more might we expect?" Mari sniffled. "Why, that's not fair. The children are related to Shem on both sides." Yudit counted the generations. "We're 4th cousins to them, once removed, twice." "Say something, Father." Jatsi shook his arm that Shem just released. "Look at this. You really do belong in Salem." Perrin slowly sat down. Pato shoved a chair underneath him just in time. Picking up the strip of parchment, Perrin ran his finger across his father's signature. "Why didn't he tell me?" he whispered. Pato wet his lips and tried to think of how to put it. Ralph didn't know himself until just before the land tremor. He said he'd probably get into trouble for finding the crate and not telling anyone. He probably didn't want to get you in trouble either if anyone should find out. He'd gone back that holy day morning to try to get more information when the tremor hit. The area collapsed on him before he reached it. "Is that why you went back inside when we visited the site?" Jatsi asked. "To try to find the crate?" Pato nodded. "I wanted to find the file of the family history Grandfather was trying to reach, but it's all gone now. He said we had all we needed. He remembered those 2 names and had me write them down. He said someday I would want them again. I guess today is someday." Perrin finally looked up at Pato. "I was the one who moved that cabinet years ago to hide the spot from where I stole Terep's map. It never occurred to me to go back again and see what was in the crate, but apparently it occurred to my father. He could have told me." Pato shrugged. "I guess he thought you weren't ready. I guess we're just a family of secrets, aren't we?" Mari looked down guiltily. Jatsi squirmed. Shem cleared his throat, and Perrin finally began to smile. "What was it I said to you, Shem, in Dec's barn? I called you a lying, deceitful brother?" "Sneaky. You forgot sneaky." "Yes, sneaky." "Looks like it runs in the family, brother." Perrin began to chuckle. "Okay, family. All right, Shem. Amazing." He stared at the slip of paper. "I simply can't believe it. I thought Jordan's situation was ironic, serving the king to avenge his lost grandparents, but I've been doing the same thing. Fod didn't know he had relatives here, and neither did I. One's been serving with me for 17 years. I guess there was a reason I always considered you my brother. Actually, Shem's a fourth cousin to you, Yudit clarified, and to Mari. So for Jatsi and Pato, since they're related twice, their connection to us is doubled. I think instead of being fourth cousins once removed twice, they should be moved up to second cousins like fractions. But no one will ever believe me that it should work that way. Perrin blinked at her. Fractions don't work that way either. Brother is just easier to remember. Pato, did your grandfather tell you when to show this to me? No, he didn't. He just wanted me to know. Perrin held up his hands in surrender. Is there anything else anyone else feels I should know about once and for all? Because, as Dex said, we've been doing this a lot, and I really would like to try to get back to a normal life without any more surprises, if that's possible. As if he would know what a normal life looks like, Yudit murmured loudly to her brother. Perrin pointed at her. Exactly. I want to start having a normal, quiet life. So anything else, please, confession time, right now. He beckoned at all of his family, including the two Zenas cousins. Mari shrugged. I can't think of anything else I should tell you about, I'm quite sure. Shem narrowed his eyes at Mari, giving her a sedative glare, then turned to Perrin. I've been keeping quiet about things for 17 years, so it's kind of hard to remember what you don't know. A few surprises may still pop up here and there, but I can't think of anything right now. Fair enough, Perrin said, and turned to Jatsi with a raised eyebrow. You know everything, Father. I'm pretty sure you do. Perrin nodded and turned to Dec. I just wonder every now and then what I've married into, he said sheepishly. Does that count? Perrin chuckled. Sure, Dec. And he turned to Pato. Peaches. Peaches, Perrin repeated. Yes, Yudit, do they grow peaches around here? Why, yes, we do, Pato. My sister has an orchard with 4 different varieties. But since your father's now glaring at me, I'm not going to say anything more. Pato, Perrin said steadily. Anything else, son? Oh, are we still doing that? I was thinking about dessert and cobblers and thought, how terrible if they don't have peaches here in the harvest season. But 4 different varieties? I thought there was only 1. Perrin sighed. You and your stomach. He held up the slip of parchment. May I keep this? Can I plant 4 different kinds of peach trees? Perrin put the piece of paper into his pocket and nodded. Do whatever you want with that back garden. Pato internalized the biggest sigh of relief ever to not be uttered. He'd picked a bad time to decide to become totally honest in everything he said and did. Father had said, after all, anything the family felt he should know about. Pato didn't feel Perrin should know anything more right now, especially about what the rest of that parchment said. For some reason, the time didn't feel right to tell him about the greatest general the world would ever see. Good thing he was sneaky, he decided, and wondered what other traits ran in his family, his now very large, extensive family. And now he knew what to do with the peach pits. If only he hadn't left them in Edge. And that's the end of that chapter. Thank you.